Hi, welcome to At the Movies at AMC. Uh, Today we're going to be talking about the classic American film noir Double Indemnity from 1944, directed by Billy Wilder. And over the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about a lot of classic American movies, and we're going to be looking at them through the lens of genre, because genre is really the overarching central organizing principle of American cinema. So if you throw up the first slide, luckily I have a slide that says the word genre. So I think most people use the term genre loosely, describing the type of movie they're going to be watching. But I think genre is really sort of a more far-reaching concept in American cinema. And if we go to the next slide, that's going to have the definition. Genre is really a set of stylistic conventions that dictate the content and tone of a film. So it's very important in Hollywood cinema. And I think it became important just because of the sheer amount of content that Hollywood produced during its golden age. It was really an industrialization of entertainment. I think most people don't know that, before the invention of television or the advent of television in American homes, movies were the only form of visual entertainment available to people. So when Double Indemnity was made, the average American went to the theater to see a movie 3 or more times a week. Just so you know, now, today, the average American goes to a theater to see a movie about twice a year. Today there are 5 major movie studios. Each one produces 8 to 10 movies a year. When Double Indemnity was made in the golden age of Hollywood, there were 5 major studios, and each one made 50 movies a year. So there was just a massive amount of product, for lack of a better word. Basically every week there were 5 new movies in theaters, and moviegoing was a real habit for most Americans. So utilizing the conventions of genre helped American filmmakers to produce this massive amount of content. And so I think this is because, genres temper people's expectations. People know what is in store. And when you think of genres in American film, it's, people will say, oh, it's a sci-fi movie, it's a Western, it's a romantic comedy. And that creates a set of expectations in the viewer. We know what we're in for, or we think we know what we're in for. For example, if you're going to go see a Western is probably going to have a saloon. There's probably going to be a gunfight and horses. But there's also, sort of negative aspects of genre as well. For instance, if you're going to go see a Western, the roles for women are going to probably be very circumscribed in a Western. It's a male-dominated genre. But these things, I think, help temper people's expectations and helped filmmakers by setting up a framework that they could use to make their film. And it may seem like the expectations of genre could be a constraint, but I think, ironically, the constraints of genre can be a spur to creativity. Because, as I said, they provide an easy framework to build your story on. But filmmakers can decide also to defy the conventions of genre and use that as a tool, a narrative tool. And so in that way, I think it's very similar to the blues in American music. The blues is a very simple 3-chord, 12-bar structure, but it's used throughout American popular music in various different ways and lots of different types of music. And people use the traditions of the blues or buck against the tradition of the blues. And in that way, it has fostered creativity. I think genre works the same way in film. So I chose Double Indemnity for the first movie because the genre that Double Indemnity is made in is the genre of film noir. So we can go to the slide that says film noir. And I chose Double Indemnity because as a classic Hollywood film, I think it is the paradigmatic film noir. It is the one single movie that best encompasses all of the classic traits of the film noir genre. And we will see how it does that. So what is film noir? I think people use the term maybe not exactly knowing what it means. And if we go to the next slide, film noir is a French term invented by French critics. And in French, it means black film or dark film. So film noir is a term of criticism that was invented after the genre already existed. It was a definition made after the fact by French critics who saw the similarities between a lot of movies that were being made in America in the 1940s and 1950s. And when they chose this term, black film, they were referring to the content of the films, the narrative content. These are films about the darkness of the human soul. These films are pessimistic. They are about people who are inexorably destroyed by their own desires and by the way that fate, people's lives are circumscribed by fate, and that a poor decision can lead to tragedy and self-destruction. And that is a common theme running through all film noir, in Double Indemnity particularly. And I think it's very interesting, you know, classic Hollywood films, I think, are primarily known for their optimism and narratives where a hero triumphs over adversity and wins in the end. So it's very interesting that, you know, during the period these films were made, this is a period when America was enjoying probably the greatest economic prosperity in its history and seeing itself become the first world superpower. And so why in these positive conditions was noir so popular, and why was Hollywood producing these dark, pessimistic movies? I think the sort of popular idea, and I think there's a lot of credence to this, is these movies were all made within the crucible of World War II. They were either made during the war or after the war. And they derive from the experience and aftermath of World War II and the trauma and the futility of the war experience. I think, you know, everyone involved in the making of these films had lived through the war, and many of the men involved in the making of these movies had actually fought in the war and returned, and many of them, you know, returned with what we would now call PTSD, but at the time was a completely undiagnosed condition. And I think the experience of seeing the horrors of World War II really informed the creative output of the generation of people that lived through that conflict. And Billy Wilder himself, the director of this movie, is a great example of that. Wilder was an Austrian Jew who escaped from Germany. He lived in Berlin, and he escaped from Germany in the 1930s. He left Berlin the day after the Reichstag fire and came to the United States, became a successful director in Hollywood. And his entire family died in the death camps during the Holocaust because they stayed in Germany. And obviously, there's no way that didn't affect his worldview and his attitude. And I think one of the great things about Wilder, if you, I invite you to watch any of his movies. He's really primarily known for making comedies, but his comedies are very sardonic and very bitter. And there's a great sort of black edge to everything he made, even his comedies. And like his film noir, I think that obviously derives from his family experience. So as I said, film noir was invented as a term to describe the genre, speaking of the narrative content of these films. But I think one of the really interesting things, and one of the reasons film noir is so effective as a genre, is that the term film noir, the darkness and the blackness, also describes the visual iconography and aesthetic of these films. And as I say, the critics who gave the genre the name were not talking about the way they look. They were talking about the thematic content. But it is absolutely true that these films are visually dark. And so I think one of the reasons film noir is so effective as a genre is that it is a perfect match between a visual aesthetic and thematic content. And so we see that visually in all the sort of classic noirs. They all feature very dark, very high contrast, black and white cinematography. If we go to the next slide, this is a still from a film called The Big Combo. And the cinematographer on this movie was one of the great cinematographers of the noir era, a guy named John Alton, who actually wrote a book about cinematography that is considered a classic. And this picture just kind of typifies noir cinematography. This is the last scene in the movie. It's a really good movie, 1955, Richard Conte. I recommend it. But characters are often shown in noirs in shadow or silhouette, as they are in this film. Sometimes we don't even see the character's face. We just see the faces in shadow, or sometimes we don't even see the character. We only see their shadow against a wall and this was a completely new thing. If you look at sort of glamorous classic Hollywood cinematography of the 1930s, the central light used in a shot was called the key light. 30s photography is high key lit. There's a high key light. If a cinematographer in the 1930s was shooting a beautiful woman like Marlene Dietrich or Greta Garbo, there'd be a high key light. But then there'd be additional lights. There'd be one light just on the top of her hair to give her hair a halo effect. There would be point spots just in her eyes sometimes, so that the eyes would sparkle. These were exquisitely lit, sort of glamorous images, and noir kind of throws that out the window. And the characters we see, if we see them, are often in shadow. And this, of course, is a visual representation of the dark thematic content. So Double Indemnity has countless examples of this, and it is really kind of the perfect exemplar for this dark cinematography. If you can go to the next slide, the very first thing we see the Paramount logo, and then the opening credits sequence begins with a shot entirely in silhouette. And we see Fred McMurray walking towards us on crutches. It's an incredibly arresting image, right? We don't know that it's Fred McMurray. We don't know why this guy is on crutches. We can't see his face. It's somehow kind of threatening because he's walking straight into camera. And eventually this silhouette envelops the entire frame, right in time for Wilder's director credit, which seems appropriate. But it really sets the mood for what we are about to see. And you can see there, like the figure just takes over the frame. The cinematographer on this movie was a guy named John Seitz, who had shot Wilder's previous movie, Five Graves to Cairo, another movie I highly recommend, not a film noir. That's a war picture. Wilder was always incredibly complimentary of Seitz's work on this picture in particular, and felt that the credit due to this picture was as much due to Seitz as it was to him. And I think that is appropriate. Another part of noir cinematography that differed from previous Hollywood films is in previous Hollywood films, almost everything was shot on set. And especially night shots, it's very difficult to shoot at night, and it's very difficult to shoot on location. So in the studio era, most night shots were shot on studios using a technique called day for night, where they were shot during the day, but filters were placed on the lens to make it seem as if it was dark, to make it seem as if it was night. And you might know, if you're a film fan, there's a very famous Francois Truffaut movie from 1974 called Day for Night. And that film is about movie making itself. And so the title is kind of a nod to the artifice of movie making. But noirs changed that. And in noir film, they started shooting more on location. And you'll notice there are some location shots in Double Indemnity when he goes to the bowling alley, when he goes to the drive-through restaurant. But they also shot in Double Indemnity night for night. They actually shot outdoors at night. And so if we look at the next clip, this is the first thing you see after the title sequence. This is Neff's car careening around downtown Los Angeles late at night. And they shot this late at night in downtown Los Angeles. And you can just see this, it's incredibly dark. I mean, it's hard. If it wasn't for the headlights of the car, you really would have no idea what is going on here. And it's so difficult. And especially then with the film stock they were shooting on then, to shoot with this little amount of light and to get an image without noise, grain. And so I think it's really to Seitz's credit that he was able to do this. And this just sets up, again, this dark night atmosphere that is so typical of classic film noir, and really sets the mood for the whole thing. So another sort of visual trope that we see in film noir cinematography all the time is light on a character shown through Venetian blinds. And so we see this, if we look at the next clip, when Neff first visits the Diedrichson house, he walks in, and you can see that the light is shining at him through Venetian blinds. And this is a metaphor. It's used in film noir constantly. It's like prison bars. It's like the character is imprisoned. And you can see the bars go across him. Even when he's looking at the pictures here, there are bars on the wall behind him because the light is reflecting through the Venetian blinds. And this, when he walks in this room, Wilder wanted the Diedrichson house to look dusty. He thought that was very important for the story. And Seitz had a lot of trouble trying to create a dusty atmosphere that could be photographed. And he finally came up with powderized aluminum. And so they had aluminum powder, which they would spray onto the set before they shot. And you can see how effectively it worked in this shot. The light is coming through the window, but it looks exactly like when you're in a dusty room and dust mites are caught in the beams of light coming through the window. And this is just another great example of Seitz's cinematography. Another sort of metaphor we see a lot, and an important visual aspect of film noir, are shadows, shadows being cast. We can see this if we look at the next clip, when Neff first comes into his office, and he's walking through his office, and you can see there, it's shot through that railing, that balustrade. And so the X's of the railing are shadowed on the wall. And then when he opens the door, what is shining through the door? An X. And he's, of course, shot completely in silhouette, in total darkness, so we can't see him. And you see that X on the door. And, these X's are a metaphor for doom, and just cancellation. And we see this throughout film noir. Sort of meaningful shadows being projected on walls or on characters, and And so in this way, the cinematography really enforces the thematic content. And I think something we really have to remember about just cinema in general, good cinema, is, the way the story is told is as important as the story itself. In many ways, the way the story is told is the story. That's the difference between cinema and other art forms. And so noir, these things we're looking at, these conventions of noir cinematography, are a great example of how that works. This dark visual style is reinforcing the darkness of the narrative. So we know that Double Indemnity, we've seen it visually embodies that content of film noir, the visual aspect, but it also embodies the pessimistic quality that made French critics give the genre its name in its narrative. And we hear this from Neff himself, and this is actually, if we just go to the next slide, this is another convention of film noir that Double Indemnity typifies. Sorry, Robert, can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. And that is that many film noirs, so much so that it kind of became a cliche that filmmakers now avoid, but many film noirs where the story was told through voiceover narration and flashback. And of course, Double Indemnity typifies this. The entire narrative is Neff telling you, or telling Barton Keyes, the story of how he became embroiled in this murder plot. And as he describes the story, we flash back to incidents happening while simultaneously hearing him comment on what's happening through his voiceover narration. But in this very first scene, the beginning of the voiceover narration, when he's introducing the story to Keyes, he says something to Keyes that really could be the central thematic statement of every film noir ever made. So I'm going to play this clip where he's talking, and let's listen. Oh, I don't hear the sound. Okay. Unfortunately, there is no sound. But what he says, and this is just typical of every film noir ever made. He admits that he killed Diedrichson, and he says, I killed him. I killed him for money, and I killed him for a woman. I didn't get the money, and I didn't get the woman. And that is the basis of every film noir. Every film noir is about someone who tries to transgress against the bonds of society, and in failing to do so, they destroy themselves. And this movie is a perfect example of that. Another sort of dark aspect of film noir that is embodied by this film and embodied by the concept I was just talking about is the idea of the femme fatale. Women in film noir are incredibly strong and important, but they exist mainly to entrap a man and cause his downfall. And Barbara Stanwyck, who plays Phyllis Diedrichson in this movie, is the epitome of that. She just uses Neff like her patsy, gets him to kill her husband, and he dies as a result. She does too, but she gets him to do her bidding, and she is really the motivator of the story. And that is true in most film noir. It's a woman's attempt to use the power of a man to her advantage is the main narrative force behind the genre. And I think Barbara Stanwyck is so incredible in this movie. And we really can see this sort of femme fatale power in the scene where they're in the car and Diedrichson is being strangled by Neff, and Barbara Stanwyck is literally sitting next to her husband. It's actually the next clip, if we can roll the next clip. She's in the front of the car, and her husband is being strangled, inches away from her. She doesn't even look. And to me, it's so brilliant. Wilder here does not show Diedrichson being strangled. He shows the wife's reaction while it's happening, or rather her lack of reaction. And you really can appreciate the iciness, of her, like really how kind of deeply evil she is. And I also think this shot is incredibly well created because, in cinema, eye line, where a character's eyes are looking in the frame is incredibly important, especially when people are having a conversation. And in this clip, Stanwyck is looking into camera, but Wilder directs her to move her eye line away from the center of the camera, so she's not looking at us. We're not making eye contact with her. We're still able to feel like an observer, but we can see in kind of her dead aspect how evil she really is. And she is so great at it. I should add that, Barbara Stanwyck was a brunette, and throughout this movie, she wears kind of a terrible, cheap blonde wig. And Wilder was adamant that she needed to wear a bad-looking wig, a fake-looking wig, because he wanted her visually to always suggest how phony she was and how two-faced and that she was a fake as a person as well. And it was very important to him. He started shooting the movie with her wearing the wig, and the executives at Paramount were not happy when they saw the initial rushes from the movie, because Barbara Stanwyck was this very famous, beautiful movie star, and Wilder was making her look cheap and tawdry. And one of the executives famously said, we hired Barbara Stanwyck, but we got George Washington because he hated the wig so much. But by that point, it was too late, and they couldn't stop shooting. So she wears the wig for the entire movie. Sort of years later, Wilder admitted that the wig was probably a mistake because her hair just looks so terrible throughout the movie, but it was entirely intentional. And I should say Double Indemnity is really interesting. This is where one of the few ways that Double Indemnity steps out of the very traditional tropes of the film noir genre, in that Double Indemnity actually has two femme fatales. There is Phyllis, played by Barbara Stanwyck, but if we go to the next clip, there's also her daughter or stepdaughter, Lola. Lola sets up the conflict between Neff and Zicchetti that ultimately results in Neff's death. And it also kind of adds to, and there's always an aspect of kind of veiled, perverse sexuality in film noir. And this, to me, this is a guy who kills a woman's husband, so essentially he can sleep with her. And then in order to hide that crime, starts dating the woman's daughter. So there's a whole nother kind of perverse element that is added on. And that is interesting to me. And then another way, and this might be sort of the primary way that Double Indemnity fulfills a fundamental thematic trope of film noir, is that trope is the unavoidability of fate. The idea that a character is doomed to be punished for their transgressions. And in film noir, this is often expressed metaphorically as a train, because when you're riding on a train, you're on tracks, you can't steer. You can only go in the direction the tracks take you. And this is kind of beautifully embodied in Double Indemnity, because the character of Neff and Diedrichson, McMurray and Stamwick, they constantly say to each other, we're together right down the line. And I if we can run the next clip, I have this clip with them saying it, but if we don't have sound, we can at least see it. Hey, Robert, can you run the next clip?
It's perfect, you understand? Straight down the line.
Straight down the line. It'll be the train, Walter, just the way you want it. Straight down the line.
Well, that suits me fine.
This is it, Walter. I'm shaking like a leaf, but it's straight down the line for both of us. It's straight down the line, isn't it?
It's 10 times twice as dangerous. They've committed a murder. And it's not like taking a trolley ride together where they can get off at different stops. They're stuck with each other, and they've got to ride all the way to the end of the line. It's a one-way trip, and the last stop is the cemetery.
And nobody's pulling out. We went into this together, and we're coming out at the end together. It's straight down the line for both of us. Remember?
Yes, I remembered. Just like I remembered what you had told me, Keys. About that trolley car ride. And how there was no getting off till the end of the line. Where the cemetery was.
And so this is just this beautiful extended metaphor that runs through the whole movie. And what's really beautiful about it is how it changes. And so initially, the two lovers are saying to each other, we're together, straight down the line, like we're in this thing to the end. But then Barton Keyes, Edward G. Robinson's character, and please don't miss the very obvious symbolism of his name, Keyes, like he is the key to the story. He unlocks the mystery of the story. Keyes points out that the two murderers, and of course, when he says this, he doesn't realize he's speaking to one of them. But he says, the two murderers are on a trolley line, again, the metaphor of the train, and they are stuck on that trolley line together until it ends, and it ends in the graveyard. And that is indeed what happens. Both Phyllis and Walter die because of their transgressions, and the fate that has brought them together takes them to their doom. So I just want to talk a little bit about the script, and then we're going to take some questions. And just point out that noir started as a literary genre, but of course it wasn't called noir. At the time, it was called hard-boiled fiction. These were detective novels, and the term hard-boiled it was a metaphor, comparing the tough, emotionally hardened attitude of the characters in these stories with the way an egg gets hard when you boil it. And I think one of the really interesting things is, unlike most American literary genres, noir is really primarily concerned with Los Angeles. And I think this is one of the main reasons it became so popular with Hollywood filmmakers. The stories are about Los Angeles, and obviously Double Indemnity is deeply tied with real places in Los Angeles. And I will just tell you, this is how crazy I am. I live in Los Angeles. And when I first moved here, one of the first things I did was find the Diedrichsons' house, because they shot those exteriors. They shot an actual house in the Hollywood Hills. And it is there. It's still there. And it looks exactly the same. And it's pretty amazing to drive by there and look at it. And similarly, I live in Los Feliz, which is the neighborhood where this entire story takes place. And every night I hear the whistle of the Glendale train, which is the train that Neff gets on and falls off of. And literally, not a night goes by when I hear that sound that I do not think about this movie. So I love the deep ties to Los Angeles that this film has. So I should point out that Wilder wrote the script. It was based on a novel by, there were basically, can we go to the next slide? There were two very important writers of film noir in America, James M. Cain and Raymond Chandler. They were the two best exemplars of the genre and the two most successful at it. So Double Indemnity was based on a novel by James M. Cain. Wilder, it's interesting, Wilder wrote all of his movies, but as I said earlier, he was Austrian. English was his second language. He always spoke with a very heavy accent. And so he always worked with a co-writer, I think primarily because he had an insecurity about his grasp of the English language, which was very unfounded because he's one of, if not the greatest screenwriters of all time. But since he bought this novel by James N. Cain, he wanted Cain to hire Cain to co-write the script with him. And ironically, Cain couldn't do it because Cain had sold another one of his novels to another studio to make another film noir. And he was working on the screenplay at that other studio at the same time. So instead, Wilder had an embarrassment of riches. Wilder hired Raymond Chandler to co-write the screenplay. So the screenplay for Double Indemnity is kind of incredible because it's I think really the only literary output that involves efforts by the two greatest American writers of this genre. And unfortunately, the partnership between Wilder and Chandler did not work out very well. They hated each other. In fact, Chandler was a recovering alcoholic, and working with Wilder made him so crazy that he relapsed and started drinking again. But interestingly, and I'm not sure why, Chandler is actually in this movie. And if you play the next clip, when Walter is walking out of Key's office, hey, Robert, can you play the next clip, please? As Neff walks out of the office, he just passes this random guy in the hall. That's Raymond Chandler. And for some reason, I mean, this is kind of incredible too, especially living in the world we live in with phones. But this is literally the only existing moving footage of Raymond Chandler. There are tons of photographs, but this is apparently the only time he was ever photographed by a movie camera. And I'm not sure why Wilder put him in there. Like he literally, Neff just walks by. He doesn't have any lines, but Chandler is in the movie. So just to sum up really quickly, Double Indemnity is the ultimate film noir because it embodies the two greatest noir authors work together. It embodies all the narrative tropes of film noir. And those tropes are expressed visually in the visual tropes of film noir. So it's really kind of like the perfect example of a film noir, I feel. And if we go to the next slide, if you're at all interested in film noirs, if you enjoy them, and there are tons, like I said earlier, Hollywood was producing 250 movies a year when this genre was popular. So there are many, many of them. Some are obviously better than others, but if you enjoy the genre, almost all of them are kind of enjoyable for their own sake. So these are kind of the ones that I would recommend. Out of the Past from 1947 with Robert Mitchum, great movie. The Big Sleep is a Howard Hawks movie from 1946 with Humphrey Bogart. It's a great detective story, a little more lighthearted than some other noirs, but still great. The Maltese Falcon, which is kind of in American consciousness, probably the most iconic noir film, directed by John Huston, again with Bogart. Gilda and Laura are two very interesting noir movies because they really feature super strong female characters that drive the narrative. And Gilda stars Rita Hayworth, who basically drives Glenn Ford crazy for 2 hours. Laura is an incredibly interesting movie with Gene Tierney about a police officer trying to solve a murder, and through the course of trying to solve the murder, he falls in love with the dead woman. It's a very interesting, haunting movie. And then finally, The Big Heat, which was made by Fritz Lang, another German expatriate, in 1953, with Glenn Ford and Gloria Graham, who is a fantastic femme fatale who's in a lot of noir movies. And that is a beautiful, Lee Marvin is the villain. Highly, highly recommended. So, and now we'll go to the last slide. And I'll just say that our next film is going to be an example of neo-noir. So this, you're seeing the preview for it. And that film is Chinatown from 1974. Many people consider this to be the best American film of the 1970s, which is really saying something because the 70s were another golden era in American cinema. And this film, as we will see, is based on the genre conventions of noir, including a heavy focus on the city of Los Angeles. And it takes place during the 1930s. But it was made during the 1970s, so it puts a decidedly modern spin on the genre and takes liberties that could not have occurred in the golden age of noir in the 1940s and the 1950s. It's a great movie, and I hope you will watch it. And we will be back here on Friday, October 25th at the same time to discuss that film and how that film takes the conventions of noir and treats them in a modern way. And so now I'm going to ask a couple questions and from you guys, and I thank all of you for watching. Margot asks, is that a voice recorder he used? So yes, that's an incredibly primitive version of a voice recorder. It's a machine called a dictaphone. And in the 1940s and 1950s, even really up to the 1960s, it was a tool that executives would use to record instructions for their secretaries to type things up. So when Neff is talking into that thing, he is ostensibly recording audio that his secretary will then type into a memo, and then that paper memo will be sent to Barton Keyes. That becomes unnecessary, obviously, because at the end of the story, it turns out Keyes has been listening. But yeah, and I don't know if you noticed this, but dictaphones recorded on cylinders. And so there are several moments in the movie where Neff has to change cylinders because the memo he's recording is so long. Sorry. Dina says, of course she's evil, meaning Phyllis, but Neff is a complete fool. However many men act like him, they are led by seductive women and then end up in a very bad situation. Amen. You are absolutely correct. And I think that that is one of the reasons why this genre is so successful in that, the circumstances of these people's situations might be heightened circumstances. They involve crime and murder. But the human impulses that drive the characters in these movies to make the mistakes they make are very basic human impulses that cause people to make mistakes every day. Someone asks, how did Hollywood, the American public, react to classic noir on a moral level? Were these films criticized as part of the moral degradation they portrayed, or were they viewed positively